Thanks for tuning in to ESPN Milwaukee's double coverage with David Rantisi and Baxter Colburn. No Green Bay Packers this weekend, Baxter. The bye week is here for the Packers. What are you going to be doing while the Packers are on break?
Well, aside from sobbing, I will be trying to find certain things to do with my life on Sunday. Probably catch a little bit of NFL football, maybe catch the Brady Manning Bowl if I get a chance. But aside from that, I think all Packer fans are happy that the break came when it did, especially with Aaron Rodgers getting a little banged up last week and just some of the other players that were struggling with injuries this season too. So having a week off to rest, relax, and recoup, and then look forward to the Bears next week is much needed at this point in the season.
For those Packer fans concerned about TJ Lang, he will not require surgery. That news came out yesterday. As for myself, probably do a little bit of the same. Watch some NFL football and probably get a little homework done. As a college student, you got to get that done. Be graduating soon, so get that out of the way. But the Green Bay Packers, again, on bye this week. But since it's the midpoint of the season, midway, it's going to be week 9 here. We thought it was probably a perfect opportunity to bring up and mention some of our grades and some of our opinions of this Green Bay Packers team so far in the 2014 NFL season. And with that, let's start, right away with their record. Their overall record should probably reflect somewhat of how the team has been doing. And right now, currently, as they stand, they're 5-3. Baxter, let me ask you, is that roughly, the area in which you thought that they would be after the halfway point of the season? Do you think they would have had more or less wins?
Well, I think that it's right about where I think a lot of fans thought they would be. I think 6-2 is actually where I was hoping they would be. I knew the first game against Seattle was a toss-up and really could have gone either way. I think Seattle was about the only team this season that if we did lose to would be, acceptable, I think, for Packer fans. That loss against Detroit really just shocked the Packers and Packer fans alike. And then New Orleans, it's Drew Brees. It's down in New Orleans. It's in a dome. It's a hostile environment to play in, not as bad as Seattle. So losing there as well. 6-2, I think, is where the Packers should have been at this point in time. But 5-3 is not terrible. They're currently ranked 7th in the NFL on the newest power ranking, so that's not terrible. But I think Green Bay Packer fans and players alike would really like to have a little bit better of a record at this point.
What's funny is I would probably, a realistic prediction for me would be 6-2. But sometimes I like to consider myself one of the crazies. Sometimes I like to look at the schedule before the season. I'm saying they're going 16-0. Call me crazy, but it's just me being a fan. I just can't and don't want to think of the Packers losing. But you have to be realistic. And the first game of the season against Seattle, Super Bowl champs, playing them in Seattle, you had to probably think that was going to be a loss. Even though deep down I wanted it to be a win, it was going to be a loss. And like you mentioned, the Detroit game was shocking to me as well because the offense in that game sputtered horribly, and they just were not able to produce. They put up an L there, and they started the season out at 1-2. But then they went on that 4-game winning streak, and now going into the bye week, they just came off that loss to the New Orleans Saints, which puts them at 5-3. But again, me predicting the record, at the halfway point of the season, I would have said 6-2 as well. So, not bad, and I'd probably give them a B so far with how the season has gone. And I think their biggest knock is probably their run defense. They're ranked last in the league with 153 yards given up a game on average. That needs to be improved. Don Capers really needs to sit down with that unit as a whole and figure out what the problem is and really start working on it.
Oh, I completely agree. And the biggest thing too we saw, especially in the New Orleans game when I was watching with some of my friends, is just the inability to just make easy tackles. Mm-hmm. There were so many missed opportunities. I know Clinton Dix had a few missed tackles, and just a lot of the Packers linebackers as well. Just, the ball runs straight up the middle, and let's go for the big-time tackle instead of the simple wrap him up and take him down. Then players for the Saints like Mark Ingram are able to just, shred a tackle or two and go for 10, 15 yards on the ground, and it's inexcusable and not something that, like you said, Don Capers needs to have a conversation with that defense and say, look, you guys are dead last in run defense in the NFL, which is unacceptable. We're lucky to be 5-3 right now. We're not, teams like Chicago with Matt Forte should have run all over us. And they did for the most part. The Bears did do a lot of offensive production that day, but still Aaron Rodgers won that duel and Jay Cutler's Jay Cutler. But I think the Packers are very lucky and blessed to be 5-3 at this point with how poorly their run defense has been this season.
But a big contributing factor to the success of that defense has been the turnover margin, because they've been able to pick balls off. They've been able to pick up fumbles off the ground. They've been able to, I think, at this point in time, last time I checked, they were leading the league. I don't know if they're leading the league anymore, but they're still, high up there when it comes to the turnover margin. So, although they are giving up yards on the ground, they're still, forcing turnovers and giving Aaron Rodgers more opportunities to score points, and that's what you want. So, that's one thing that's a really big positive so far about this defense is the turnover margin, and it's exciting. It's super exciting. I think that's probably one of the more exciting plays you can see when you're sitting there, watching the defense. Like, we need a big play, maybe a sack, maybe a big tackle, and then it's a turnover. That's awesome. And last year we saw how much this defense struggled, especially at the safety position, because not one safety had an interception all season last year. To have a guy like a Ha-Ha Clinton Dix now to be able to produce, to have some of these other players, Tramon Williams has looked better than he did last season. So, so far the secondary, I think, is probably the stronger unit on the entire defense. But still, concerning is the middle of that defense, especially at the nose tackle position and the inside linebacker position. So hopefully we can get some things patched up there, headed into the second half of the season. And let's take a look at the second half of the season. Let's take a look at, not this week, obviously, but the following week. We have the Chicago Bears, Baxter.
The Bears.
The division rival Chicago Bears, second time around, but we're playing them at home. And it's going to be a Sunday night game, so it's going to be a national game. Yeah. Initial thoughts on that at all?
Well, I think you look at a team like Chicago who was basically spoiled for offensive resources. If you're Jay Cutler, I think, even if it wasn't Jay Cutler back at quarterback, I think this team would still be successful, probably more successful. Not to rip on Jay, this isn't rip on Jay hour, but you have guys like Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey, Martellus Bennett, and Matt Forte. Those four guys alone are just offensive weapons that any quarterback, I think, would kill to have on their team. So looking at that initially, it does worry me. Chicago has had a bit of a poor run of form recently, dropping some games, getting just taken down by the Patriots. Tom Brady, I think, putting the Bears defense in their place, but Tom Brady will be Tom Brady, and Rob Gronkowski is just an animal. 3 touchdowns in that game. But I think the Bears will always pose a threat. I have a friend of mine, and he says that the Packers could be 15-0 and the Bears could be 0-15. It could be the last game of the season going into that match against the Bears, but you would always be scared because it is the Bears. Just because they're a bitter rivalry, big things always happen in that game, regardless if it's a close scoreline or not. Something crazy, something out of the ordinary always happens in that game, and I think you have to respect the Bears because of their offensive firepower and the fact that they do have some talented players on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I agree. Any given Sunday, you just never know. But to me, what's surprising is they have yet to win a game at home, and all of the Bears' wins have come on the road. And their most impressive win was in Week 2 when they played the 49ers. They won in San Francisco there 28-20. They've beaten a New York Jets team on the road, a very not very good Jets team, and then they've also beaten a not very good Atlanta team on the road as well, 27-13 in Week 6. That's their 3 wins. Right now, currently, as they stand, they're 3-5, and they're on their bye week as well. So both teams are going to be coming off of this bye week rested, getting some of their guys back, hopefully for the Packers, getting some of their guys back. I'm just going to come out and say it. This is the first thought that comes to my mind. The Packers are going to win this game.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that.
You can say there's
a little doubt,
but it's not even from a fan's perspective. It's from a obviously, I'm not trying to say this is a guaranteed win, but the way that the arrow's pointing for the Packers and the way that the arrow's pointing for the Bears right now, they're going in 2 opposite directions. So just kind of, it's more of a trending thing. It's more of a, how healthy and how successful has this team looked for the Green Bay Packers compared to the Chicago Bears, yeah, you kind of have to pick the Packers in this scenario. So I'm picking the Packers to win in week 10 against the Bears at home.
I would agree with that. I think I like the Packers winning that game as well. I'd like it by 14. I think that's a fair margin. That might be a bit much, but
I'll say 10.
You like 10? Okay.
I'll
My only concern
10.
is if we can stop Matt Forte, I like us by 14. If we can't, then I think it'll be maybe by 3 to 7 at the most, in all honesty. So, but one thing I wanted to say about the Bears, though, is honestly, after they beat San Francisco at San Francisco in week 2, I was scared. I was like, whoa, this Bears team is actually pretty darn good, beating a San Francisco team. But then we've seen how the 49ers have kind of fallen out of contention. They're still a good ball club. They still got some quality players on their team, but they haven't shown up hardly at all this season. But week 2, though, when I read the score line of that game against the 49ers, I was worried. I was like, ooh, the Bears might actually pose a solid threat this season. And what about the Lions? Where the heck have they come from?
I don't know. I mean, if you want to talk about the Lions for a quick minute, they're a team that is very surprising. Their record, they're 6-2. I think they're also on their bye week. 3 NFC North teams on their bye week for week 9. But when you take a look at some of their wins, especially the last 2, they just absolutely, if you're a Packers fan, you have to be so irritated at these 2 wins because they barely squeak out a win at home against the Saints, 24-23. I think they kicked that last second field goal. And then they play the Falcons in London, and they ice themselves, right, to kick a game-winning field goal. He misses the kick. They kick it again, and they score to win 22-21 to win by 1 point. And that's how the last 2 games have gone for the Detroit Lions to put them at 6-2 and first in the NFC North. That's, as a Packers fan, that's irritating. But what I will say is this. We're talking about the Detroit Lions here, okay? They find a way to mess it up. Like they did last year, they found a way to mess it up. And the Packers won that division at 8-7-1. So I'm not too worried about it. But if the Lions start looking like the Lions, just don't be surprised.
Oh, and that's one thing, too, that really bothers me is that where I go to college at Wisconsin Lutheran College, there's a lot of Lions fans there. Mm-hmm. And if there's one thing that I despise more than a Bears fan, it's a Lions fan. And it's a greedy Lions fan that walks up to me and says, "Oh, how are the Packers doing? Oh, what's that? Oh, yeah, the Lions have a better record." Mm-hmm. Every time I see him, I'm just like, give it time.
Yeah,
that's all I have to say back to them. Like, give it time. Matthew Stafford, he's good for at least 1 interception a game. He's very consistent in that aspect, and I'm like, just give it time. You guys always start out hot. I think they even started out pretty hot last season as well. I think so, yeah. But then they fizzled out at the end, and like you said, the Packers really no business winning the division with an 8-7-1 record. If you tell that to any football expert and say, "Oh, this team won 8-7-1, won the division," they would laugh at you and be like, "That's impossible. How is that? How does that happen?" But you have to look at Detroit's defense, though. 5th overall in pass defense, 2nd in stopping the run. Those numbers are impressive. But then you flip it over on the offensive side of the ball, 9th in passing. That's not terrible, considering Calvin Johnson's been in and out this season. But their run production, 31st in the league, averaging almost 80 yards a game. Having players like Reggie Bush on your team, you'd think he'd be a little bit more dynamic, but Reggie Bush has made that transition into more of a kind of what a Brian Westbrook was for the Eagles back in the day, or even LaShawn McCoy, where he's more of a threat, catching passes behind the line of scrimmage and then being able to break them off for 10 to 20 yards at a time.
One key notable here for the Lions and the Packers, they play each other week 17. If it does come down to it, and they're playing for the division like the Packers and Bears did last year, the Packers play at home, and we're just going to have to wait and see how everything plays out. That's the beauty of the NFL. But before we go, we want to give a couple of awards, more notably to the rookies, some of the new guys on the team. I think it's unanimous by probably many people, but the rookie of the year for the Green Bay Packers so far would go to
Clinton Dix.
Okay. And I agree. He's definitely I think 3rd in the team with overall tackles. He's looked really good, and I mean here's a stat line: 33 solo tackles, 10 assists, 43 total tackles. He even has a sack on the season, and I believe an interception. So
against the Lions.
Against the Lions, he's looked solid, and Another guy that you can talk about if you want to bring into the conversation is Davante Adams at wide receiver, the second-round draft selection out of Fresno State. I have my 2 cents on Davante, but is there anything that you've liked so far seeing him play with Aaron?
Davante's an interesting product. I like the fact that Aaron Rodgers is so comfortable with him, and I feel bad saying this, but I feel like if Jared Aberdarius had not been hurt, we'd be talking about Aberdarius right now and not
Really?
Davante Adams, because it sounded like the way Aaron Rodgers talked about Aberdarius going into the season, or Magic, as he calls him, he seemed like he had a really good relationship with him, and we already kind of thought that he would be the main return guy and get some solid playing time on offense. Now, I don't think anybody accounted for Jared Boykin playing as poorly as he has so far this season, but being what it is now, Davante Adams, he has turned into a quality player. He's really done a lot of good stuff so far and really emerged as that true number 3 option that I think a lot of teams are going to forget about. And he's a quality wide receiver. He had a great college career. He was drafted in the 2nd round by the Packers. While all the opposing defenses are off watching Nelson and Cobb, Davante Adams is going to be wide open, usually across the middle, and Rodgers picks him out, knows he's reliable, and he's already got 2 touchdowns to his name. I like the way he's playing. 2 touchdowns on the season.
Here's the thing. This comes down to philosophy. This comes down to Ted Thompson's philosophy.
I was never good at philosophy.
Yeah, neither was I. But according to Ted Thompson, going off of his previous draft classes, Greg Jennings, drafted in the 2nd round. Randall Cobb, drafted in the 2nd round. Jordy Nelson, drafted in the 2nd round.
I'm sensing a trend here.
Davante Adams, drafted in the 2nd round. And a couple other pass catchers like James Jones and Jermichael Finley, 3rd round guys. Andrew Corliss. Not Andrew Corliss. Richard Rodgers, 3rd round guy. To me, I'm saying that Davante Adams in a couple seasons is going to be up there with Jordy and Randall, just like Greg Jennings was, just like James Jones was. So we're seeing an early transformation in his rookie season. By next year, he's going to be another one of those guys. So I like the draft selection. Obviously, it's panned out so far as Davante has emerged as a number 3 guy. And, and Ted Thompson we trust. And that's what I've always said. I love his draft selections, and Davante is another one of those guys.
Do you think that Davante and either Jeff Janis or Jared Aberdarius are going to be the next Jordy and Randall, respectively?
I think Davante will be.
Okay.
I don't know if Jared is because he hasn't been on the field. And Jeff Janis, obviously a 7th round guy out of... Where was he from? I can't
Some
even
Division
remember.
II school. I don't know.
The point is, I think Jeff is Saginaw Valley. Jeff Janis, we haven't really seen a whole lot out of him in the regular season, so that's tough to say. But I think Davante Adams, I will put my stamp on that, and I will say he will be the next Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, Greg Jennings type of players to the Green Bay Packers at the receiver position.
I would agree with that. I think he's got a tremendous upside and is an exciting player to watch, and we've seen that already multiple times this year. And anytime he's got the ball at in his hands, he's very dangerous, and he's a terrific route runner. And I think Aaron Rodgers has already got a deep amount of respect for him. And being able to have a guy like Aaron Rodgers respect you and trust you as a rookie doesn't happen every day.
No.
So Adams needs to take full advantage of that and produce as much talent, as much production as he can have, I guess, this season. He needs to make it count and really show Ted Thompson, Coach McCarthy, and Aaron Rodgers, say, look, I can be a reliable option for many seasons to come.
Totally agree with you. I know it was just one award, but we're probably going to have to cut it short here on double coverage. So, again, looking forward in Week 10, the Green Bay Packers play the Chicago Bears. Hopefully that's a W. But I am David Rantisi. That is Baxter Colburn with double coverage. We appreciate you guys tuning in. And that's all we got for you guys today.